so that everybody's connections can pick up and catch any last minute folks that are joining us. Look at Chris waving. I love your laugh, Chris. I have to say that.
Thanks.
All right. Well, while we're still entering the room, I hope everybody has had a lovely conference so far. If you are just joining us today, you missed yesterday. Dr. Stefaniak did present yesterday, and that recording, Chris or somebody else will have to say where that's going to live, but that will be available for you to listen to. I highly recommend it, not just because she's my friend, but because it was really good. All right. And we still have folks joining us, but I will get started. So good morning again to everyone. My name is Dr. Rebecca Reese, and I have the absolute pleasure of getting to introduce our keynotes for ELK. Today's keynote is Dr. Tonia Dousay. Dr. Dousay is just one of the most amazing individuals. She is Associate Dean for Assessment and Accreditation at the University of Idaho College of Education, Health and Human Sciences. She's an Assistant Professor for Learning Sciences. She is a Secondary Science Education Program Coordinator. Her recent research collaborations include implementing Minecraft and industry software for virtual geology field camp, facilitating on-time, I need my glasses, on-time graduation during COVID for students for 4 different universities. Her current research looks at implementing course-based near-peer research experiences for pre-service science teachers and validating an instrument of self-assessment perceptions of creativity. Notice when you work with people with PhDs, they make really long names for things. We need to work on that. She is also, she has the 6th edition of the Survey of ID Models coming out late 22, early 23. This is a book that she has been writing with Dr. Rob Branch. And for me, most importantly, Tonia is my birthday twin. We are connected on so many different levels. We have, we like just yesterday evening, we were talking about something and she was like, wait, what? That's that. And I'm like, so I'm thinking maybe when you're a birthday twin, you end up with some strange, weird genetic connection too. I don't know. I'll let the scientists figure that part out. But anyway, today, Dr. Dousay is going to be talking about Mo Money, Mo Problems, the shifting landscape of online learning, instructional design, and higher education. And so without any more words from me, please welcome Dr. Tonia Dousay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reese. I'm not sure that I can live up to that particular introduction, but I can speak a little bit to this weird genetic cosmic link. We have a younger birthday twin from the University of Georgia that I met during my doc program. She and I were born in the same hospital 10 years apart. And yesterday, Dr. Reese and I discovered that our fathers served on the same naval ship with John McCain. It's just, who knew? All the weirdness. So yes, Mo Money, Mo Problems. That's what we're here to talk about today. And if you can't tell, I have a thing for pop culture, hence sitting at the Central Perk today. I want to mention before I get into screen share and this morning's keynote that this is an audience participation keynote. I'm going to need you to use your reactions in Zoom to help me throughout this conversation, because it is a conversation. I'm going to ask some questions. We're going to tell some stories. We're going to explore. And I know from yesterday's keynote that the chat's going to be blowing up with those backdoor conversations. And I'm going to watch it as best as I can, but I'm going to need those reactions to help me know if I'm even in the target. So without further ado, let's get into Mo money, mo problems, the shifting landscape of online learning, instructional design, and higher ed. Now, I want you to notice that little asterisk there next to shifting landscape. As I start this keynote this morning, I want to share with you my multiple identities and why I'm talking about this particular topic. Hello, my name is Instructional Designer. I started off my career post-master's degree. I did bachelor's, master's back to back as an instructional designer. I've maintained that particular identity and shifted into the role of instructional design consultant for various companies over the years. But I also have this identity as being an e-learning manager. I was the very first e-learning manager for the Texas A&M Engineering Extension Service back in 2005. Feels like forever ago. My identity has shifted slightly to also include being a teacher educator. So you heard from my introduction from Dr. Reese that I work with pre-service science teachers. I coordinate secondary science education at the University of Idaho. And being a teacher educator is important to me, and helping teachers realize the power of instructional design is also important to me. And then last but not least, this identity as a researcher and what that looks like. These are 4 different identities that overlap for me, but bring this perspective for this morning's conversation. Because of these identities, that's where that little asterisk comes from. If you haven't noticed, the shifting landscape is always shifting. Would that be fair to say? This is where I'm looking for my reactions. Thank you. Seeing those thumbs up, yes. The landscape is always shifting. But let's take a look at what mo money in ed tech means for us as IDs and designers of learning in higher ed. Anybody familiar with Zillow Gone Wild? It's an entertaining place to lurk about. So Zillow Gone Wild could probably be a great example of mo money. I mean, in the upper left here, we've got 50 shades of purple. I mean, my mom's favorite color is purple. I'm not sure that I could live in that purple house. Could any of y'all? Would that work? I find myself quite the David Bowie fan. In fact, just last night, we were out at a restaurant here in San Diego, and I fell in love with this painting of a Ziggy Stardust lion. Kid you not, there's a lion that has the Ziggy Stardust lightning bolt on it. But I don't know that I really want a David Bowie swimming pool. That seems like an interesting use of mo money. I am a Gen Xer, so there in the bottom left, my gosh, I don't know that I would want to live in the Flintstones house, but I guess I could if I had mo money. And then last but not least, there in the bottom right, there's this random climbing wall in their living room. Anybody ever wanted to have a climbing wall in your living room? That's a bit, right? A little right too close to the fan. I would literally, like, so many issues here. So we can already see what mo money can do to a situation. Anybody looking for a house lately? Because I've been looking at some markets trying to buy. It's a bit rough out there. Both of these houses are currently for sale in Anchorage, Alaska, for more than $500,000. And I'm hoping that money is for the land that the buildings sit on, because I need more money to fix these houses up. So these pictures, these collections from Zillow Gone Wild and Realtor.com help us kind of set the stage for this conversation of what do we mean by mo money, mo problems? So here's what the mo money picture actually looks like out there right now. These numbers are simply staggering. Look at that jump from COVID. These are the EdTech venture infusions of funding into the tools and platforms that we use. You can see that the China market share has shrunk most recently, but look at that. Just 10 years ago, we weren't even scratching $1 billion of venture capital in education and technology. 10 years later, $20 billion globally. So this tells us that there's a lot of money floating out there. And from an equitable conversation, I can appreciate that, Garrett. Capitalists are going to prosper. People are wanting to make money because there's an investment opportunity. There is opportunity is what this tells us. But let's look a little bit deeper at what this picture looks like. These are some of the folks who went public in the last few years. So Coursera probably looks familiar to some folks, right? A tool, a platform that some of you might use. Personally, I actually, in our office, so Dr. Reese mentioned that I'm the Associate Dean for Assessment Accreditation at U of I. And I have a program coordinator who manages much of the data analysis for those processes and reports that we have to create. We often go out to Coursera and look for quick courses that he might need to take to get up to speed on certain skills. Then there's Duolingo. They're in the bottom left corner, our little friendly owl. Many of us in the audience have a colleague, Dr. Heather Leary at BYU. And I just recently saw her posting on social media about hitting her 100-day learning streak with learning German. So Duolingo is another big one out there in the market, and they just went public. Upper right corner, you see Nerdy. This was a platform that I was not as familiar with until recently when they went public. And one of the biggest names behind Nerdy is Varsity Tutors. So now I'm thinking about back when I was in college, just a few years ago, and selling my course notes to Notes and Quotes in College Station, Texas, for a couple of my classes to get some extra cash on the side. And then they would turn around and sell my notes out to students who wanted to skip class. That market has exploded tremendously. And especially during COVID, we saw families and we saw adults looking to supplement their education through other means, trying to get tutoring assistance. Nerdy stepped in to fill that learning platform need, and now they've gone public. The other two should look pretty familiar for quite a few folks. Instructure, my favorite LMS. I'm not going to lie, Canvas is my favorite. I started off using first.
Dr. Dousay, you're muted.
Oh, yep, you're muted.
That's weird.
No, she's not.
No, I was muted.
Okay.
Huh. Fabulous. So could somebody let me know when the mute kicked on by itself? I have ghosts in the room.
Just maybe 30 seconds.
You were telling us where you started. Canvas is your favorite.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So Canvas is my favorite. I started off using First Class as a distance learning student in a master's program 20 years ago. Graduated, then found myself using WebCT to help faculty develop their courses circa 2001, 2002. We've all been part of the Blackboard takeover over the last 20 years. I used the Angel LMS as an instructor before they were bought out by Blackboard. I used learn.com as the e-learning manager for TEKS. Oh gosh, D2L, back to Blackboard at different institutions. Anybody remember Pearson eCollege? Oh, ooh. Did not like that one, but that was one of the ones I had to use. So now we're back on Canvas, and they are a big player in the field, and Instructure finally went public. Do I have any folks who work in the K-12 development realm and you use PowerSchool? I was actually a little surprised to see that they went public as well in the last year. All of these companies represent this theme of mo money that has been infused into the market, into our jobs. But does mo money mean mo success? What do we think? Help me out in the chat. No, it's a pretty easy answer. Nope. Mo money doesn't mean mo success. So here's where we're gonna dovetail slightly. I'm gonna let you take a look at this lovely GIF, and then I'll draw the connection for you. Absolutely. Yes. Yes, you can totally hear it, can't you, Meg? I don't have a very good Joker Heath Ledger voice, but you know what I noticed? Nobody panics when things go according to plan, even if the plan is horrifying. So yesterday, we heard from Dr. Jill Stefaniak, and she talked about organizational anarchies. And I have to admit that the moment she said that, my brain went to the Joker. Some people just want to watch the world burn. Mo money can contribute to these organizational anarchies that we are experiencing. So help me out in the chat. What are some of the new tools and integrations that you've been grappling with over the last 3 years? AI, okay. VR, oh my gosh. Social media, how do we work? And this is a fun one. Thank you for that, Angela, because I'm the outgoing co-chair of the social media SIG here at the Society for Information Technology and Teacher Ed. And yesterday's SIG meeting really got deeply into how do we ethically use social media in our classes? And how do we help pre-service teachers in particular understand those ethical dilemmas of requiring their students to use social media, or requiring families to use Facebook to communicate with schools and teachers? These contribute to the challenges that we're all facing. And how do we incorporate Zoom and Google Meet? Looks like Mike is struggling with how to, or not, maybe not struggling, but is working on using Kaltura. Video creation using Chegg. Oh gosh, Chegg's another one that we can talk about ethical dilemmas with. My gosh. We're trying to take a grasp of all of these tools that are out there and figure out where they fit back into our platforms and how we create these learning ecosystems. But if anybody's a fan of The Oatmeal, it's a comic by Matthew Inman. It feels like having pumpkin spice season and pumpkins are just being thrown at you from every direction. It's tools. And how do we use these tools? And how do we get control? How do we grab all of these tools? We're going to talk about some strategies to help think about that. What are some of the new structures that we're grappling with and the structures that are out there? So what do I mean by this? Centralized models versus decentralized models. So here's one that I think a lot of our folks, those of you who are joining us in ELK from Colorado, because I know we've got a lot of folks from around the country and the world in here, but for my Colorado peeps in the audience, my understanding is that HLC has come in and made some requests, and you're shifting between these centralized and decentralized models. And Anne nailed it. She's coming to us from Maine, but literally, who's my boss? Who am I reporting to? So I have a few thoughts about what happens under these models, but this is again where I want your help. What do the centralized models and teams look like for some of you? When I was working as the e-learning manager at TEACS, we had a centralized model. I was in administration. I had 2 animation specialists. I had a coding developer. And then we had, and it was a bit of a hybrid, we had embedded instructional designers in our divisions, but we all had to sit down at the table, and my shop had full control. We had project management approaches in place. Every project had a Gantt chart. We had ticketing systems to keep track of what was coming in and when new projects or assets needed to be created. We had these actual planned development cycles with revisions. So it looks like Jennifer's dealing with an institution trying to be both. We're going to talk about the challenges of hybrid models, absolutely. So Kay's helping clarify for us. So the new HLC shifts won't require centralization. But that's going to create some messes, isn't it? And as we think about what a decentralized model looks like, you've got independent management happening within a unit. There are some increased risks of entropy, another concept we talked about yesterday with Dr. Stefaniak. I'm actually remembering when I was at TEEX and we were going through the LMS procurement process. Oh my gosh, has anybody had to work on that? It's a nightmare, especially when you're working with state agencies and you've got to make sure you meet the different requirements. And then, am I working with the right vendors? Did we check all the boxes? Oh, this vendor didn't fill out that form, so I can't even look at their proposal. So we were going through this process, and I was talking to the folks at learn.com who did eventually get bought by Blackboard. And they were like, oh, well, we have several Texas agencies that work with us who have contracts. And they shared this information with me. Now, what I found fascinating wasn't, thank goodness, my own agency, but the Texas Department of Transportation apparently had 6 different contracts with 3 different learning management system vendors because they had a fully decentralized model and they didn't communicate. Now, being minded as I was as a manager, that thought terrified me because I was like, my gosh, that means that the TxDOT budget is hemorrhaging money because nobody paid attention to the fact that everybody had this one contract or this one platform. We've gotten a little bit better at this. So a great example I can give here, if we happen to have anybody from Wyoming in the audience, just north there, your next door neighbors in Colorado. I was formerly at the University of Wyoming and watched as the state decided, gosh, I guess it's been about 5 years now, maybe 6. They looked at the landscape and said, well, this district is using Canvas and that district is using Canvas and that district is using Canvas. Wait, why are all of these school districts using Canvas independent contracts? Why don't we just get a single contract at the state level to make this more affordable? But for those of you that work in that particular model, does that solve the problems once we consolidate under a single contract? Or do we find out that there's other challenges? It's hard to get anything customized. We can lose jobs when we consolidate in that aspect. There's always that, thank you for that, Chris, desires for exceptions. Because then what happens, someone then makes a central decision and it kills off particular features or aspects that you might have been using, because now we're not paying attention to the needs that we had individually, and we can't work as effectively. So that hybrid model, some of you have been talking about this one as well. This landscape has shifted tremendously over the last couple of years, and now it feels like we're all working in some variation of hybrid models. So I'd like to hear some of your examples. Earlier, we saw from Ann and a few others, I don't know who my boss is in a hybrid model. Am I reporting to this person in the unit that I'm working with? Or am I reporting back to a manager in a different unit? Who do I go to when I need particular help? I don't want us to focus on the negatives, though. I want us to also think about some of the positive ways that these models and processes can be used. So thinking about developing new instructional designers, one of my favorite aspects of a hybrid model, and this can't, to be fair, this can be done in decentralized and centralized models, having service learning experiences for developing instructional designers who are in degree programs, certificate, undergraduate, graduate, doesn't matter, placing them into instructional design roles to fill those needs. If you haven't noticed, we don't have enough IDs. I would argue we, in higher ed, in certain aspects, we have enough teachers, but we don't have enough instructional designers to be effective communicators of content. There's also an interesting shift that I'm seeing out there that's being experimented with. and that's having clinical track faculty. So you're not expected to research, you're not necessarily even expected to publish, but you are embedded in a unit and providing instructional design expertise. So let's say you go through your career preparation and you specialize in marketing and business as an undergraduate and you get an MBA, and then you suddenly find yourself curious about learning design and you go get a doctorate, EDD, PhD, I don't care, in instructional design. And now you're looking for a faculty position. Theoretically, depending on the institution, you could be an embedded clinical faculty member in a college of business, not in the College of Education or an LDT program, but you're a clinical faculty member in business, supporting your colleagues with instructional design and dipping back into your previous expertise. This is one that has me intrigued, Meg. I've seen it at a few institutions on the East Coast, particularly with engineering, because engineers love systems and they're starting to recognize the value of this type of colleague or faculty member. I was kind of hoping I might have someone in the audience who had seen this. Or maybe I just had a fever dream. Not really. Oh, I love it, Catherine. I didn't mean, Catherine Claire, I did not mean to capture your life, but I'm so glad that I did. Ah, thank you. Yes, Amber noticed this at University of South Florida and University of Florida, I'm guessing are our acronyms there. Florida, South Carolina, Virginia, North Carolina, there's a couple of institutions back east where I've seen this model happening. And that's exactly it. It would let you give back to teaching, but also dipping into that ID role in a different way, making it a unique experience. The service learning piece is one that I was probably familiar with first. Some of you may be familiar with a program that was happening at Bath Spa University in the UK. They actually connected with AECT, the Association for Educational Communications and Technology, about a decade ago. And they were recruiting student interns from graduate programs to assist faculty at Bath Spa with converting their courses for distance delivery. And so it was creating a great CV line item that would let these developing IDs work with faculty and fill that need. And it created an interesting hybrid alternative approach to developing ID, because there was a bit of a centralized oversight, but then they let go the control and let the interns work directly with the faculty that were out there in the field. And yes, absolutely, Meg, helping non-pedagogically trained professors gain these tools and help them understand. And Shannon, I love this. Faculty and residents teach and get one course release and do ID work for e-learning. I'm very curious to see where this particular model goes. And I think it could be an interesting area for research as we look at some of the concepts that Dr. Stefaniak shared yesterday and looking at these challenges that we're facing as a field. But speaking of challenges that we're facing as a field, what does this mean for us in practice? So I'll let you watch my next little GIF there. Remember at the beginning I mentioned I'm a pop culture fan. I love to connect things back and give you a cognitive connection. The next time you see Mario Kart or you see the Joker, you're going to remember this keynote. That was my goal, tapping into my cognitive theories here. So I wanted to get back to basics. I want us to think about what it means to look at our processes, formal and informal, clarifying our roles. And this is a concept that I've been working on because I'm a faculty member part-time. I'm an administrator part-time. I'm a researcher part-time. This is if you break out all of the pieces of my position description. What's my lane? What lane do I stay in? Does anybody feel like some of the models that your shop might be in have you shifting lanes? Are you changing lanes frequently? Does it feel like you bump up against other colleagues, other programs sometimes? Yes. Oh, library. Yes, they do, Angela. Librarian and instructional design lanes merge and then crash and wait, now we've got to stand up and get our bearings straight. So let's talk about getting back to basics. Let's talk about what our formal processes are. What are some of our informal processes? Anybody have some informal processes that aren't codified that contribute to crashing? Maybe it's a practice that you've got to create particular assets, but it's not written down anywhere. There's no formal way to go about it. The example I'll give here was getting started with our e-learning shop at Teeks. We had disagreements over should administration be the group to pay for a Shutterstock subscription to get images, or should individual divisions do this? And eventually we created backdoor processes because of the conflict. And then somehow before I left, we were able to get it codified into the budget that administration would handle it, because it was an informal process that did keep creating issues. Oh, Angela, yes. Dr. Stefaniak would love your comment. We forget to do the analysis. We forget that needs analysis, because maybe formally our processes say that we follow the ADDIE process. I'm going to continue her thread because this is something that she and I agree wholeheartedly on. ADDIE is a process, not a model. Repeat after me. ADDIE is a process, not a model. But sometimes we forget that A at the beginning. Informally, we're like, oh yeah, formally, we totally analyze, design, develop, implement, evaluate. But in practice, do we really do all of those things? In our heads, we do, absolutely. But then going back to clarifying our roles and our lanes and trying to respect our lanes. I'm curious if anybody out there doesn't have issues with lane changing or crashes. Can I come work for you, first of all? Ah, that's a great point, Kay. Especially if we were to use UBD backwards design. I just totally skip that analysis piece. I totally assume what's happening there. How can we respect our lanes? Anybody have some thoughts on that particular question? Oh, okay, with the zinger. Do we have to respect our lanes? I like that one, Angela. Acknowledging other experts, that's a big piece. Yes, back to our anarchists, absolutely. Collaborating. Defining communication. I am so glad you said that, Beth, because that's my next point. Clear and direct communication. Defined communication plans. This goes back to the other issues, though. We don't always follow. Sometimes we skip. The hard part here with communication is sometimes we have to step back and realize that it's not always about me. It's not always about you. But we have to create some cooperative agreements. We have to at least have an informal social contract with our collaborators to keep it going. So here's the strategies. Here's Tonia's 3 steps to getting back to the basics. Let's keep it simple. I want to explore this first one first. Obviously, the first comes first, not last. Who knew? Use your tools as needed and as directed. Sometimes you walk around with a hammer and every problem looks like a nail. We don't have that problem as IDs, do we? You find this really cool tool. Actually, we'll go for a K-12 example here. Jamboard everywhere. I found a really cool tool. I want to use it everywhere. Every problem can be solved by Jamboard. Every collaboration can be solved by using Jamboard, right? True, not just K-12. I'm watching it like bleed over into higher ed as well. Absolutely. So we grab onto these tools and we walk around exactly, Brad for the win. We just had this conversation recently. Try to get a screen reader to read a Jamboard. Let me know how that works out for you. Or green stickies, pink stickies, blue stickies with red text on them. Yeah, that's not a nightmare waiting to happen. And there's so many other tools out there. So we've got to think about using our tools as needed and as directed. So going back, and this is, I love it because Brad set me up for this piece as well. Using models to guide our decisions. UDL should be a foundation. Earlier, we were talking about inclusive ADDIE. I believe Chris Gamrat was part of that project. Good friend of mine over at Penn State. We've got to take our models and pull them back in and think about that we don't just have to use one. I'm going to share a paper with you at the end that you can download and grab. I will be completely honest and frank. It is the first paper that I wrote as a graduate student and presented at a conference in South Africa. But it was a backwards reflection of an ID project for a client where my co-designer and I picked apart each phase of ADDIE on this project and then went and talked about, oh, well, we used a little bit of Cascade here, and we used a little bit of the diamond model here. And Smith and Reagan informed our work here so that we could explore that no one model fits all. There is no model to rule them all. I'm waiting for Mordor to produce that one. But we've got to get back to the basics, keep it simple, use our tools as needed and as directed, and then refer back to our ID models and our supplemental frameworks to guide our decisions. This is another theme that we talked about yesterday with Dr. Stefaniak. Constraints. Constraints don't have to feel like a straitjacket. Leverage your constraints to manage expectations. Now, the question I hope you're asking is whose expectations? Would that be fair? Is that a thought on some of your minds? Because the answer is all expectations. Stakeholder expectations, student expectations, collaborator expectations. Leverage those constraints. Don't view them as a straitjacket preventing you from designing. Yes, that is my goal, Amber. Creating an organic flow that is natural. We don't have to follow rigid models, but we do have these rules and needs to keep us in different lanes, or that can at least help us change lanes safely without bumping into someone else. My second point here, though, is something that you are all doing today, and it makes me so happy. Maintaining your professional development. Because 10 years ago, we didn't have inclusive ADDIE. 10 years ago, we weren't broadly talking about UDL. I love that ELK has an entire JEDI track looking at justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I was also recently added another letter. I was in a meeting and they addressed belonging. So we can't say JEDI. It's not as cool as rolling off the tongue as being JEDI, and we can't use our JEDI mind tricks on instructional design. But the B is important, belonging, and developing a sense of belonging in our designs. So maintaining your professional development is key so that you can go back to using your tools as directed and needed and having these tools help you guide your decisions. This last piece of advice is a no-brainer, but it's always one of my favorites. I sometimes write it on a sticky note because I have to remind colleagues of this frequently. Fail to plan to fail. We are now emerging from a deluge of lessons, of case studies in our individual organizations and shops. If you don't have an after action review, I'm going to go tap into the military side of my brain. If you don't have an after action review type of process in place, now is the time to develop one so that you can look back at what you've done. The image that I have here on this screen is actually a little bit sentimental. It is related to the paper that I mentioned a moment ago. So my first year of my PhD, I had to take Edit 6170 at the University of Georgia, Introduction to Instructional Design. Keeping in mind that I had just come from working as an instructional designer for 9 years, like that was my title, instructional design specialist. But I had no formal preparation or training. I spent the first week of the semester reading, soaking up the principles of ID from Bob Gagne. And my mind exploded, realizing that there was an entire discipline to explain why the things I did worked or didn't work. As part of the project in that class where we worked with a client, we had to create a visual that represented our design process. Notice that we didn't pick a specific model. We went with the generic ADDIE process. But see what we did with the E? It wasn't at the end. After the analysis, we made ourselves stop and quickly evaluate what was in the analysis and was anything missing? Was there a perspective missing? And sure enough, we identified a few key areas that we needed to go grab. After the design, we evaluated the design plan and the client document. After we developed the materials, rather than holding on to feedback, we went ahead and implemented those through a quick evaluation phase. Then we implemented the final training and conducted a summative evaluation. So we built in that formative evaluation piece of our process. It sounds like it's cumbersome, but really, it doesn't have to be. I'll give you an example of how I do this now as an instructor. Midterm, 8 weeks into the semester for a 16-week term. I give my students a 3-question formative evaluation. What do you like the most about class? What do you like the least about class? What do you wish you could change? I take that feedback, I leave it as an open form. So I use a Microsoft form since we are a Microsoft institution. And I grab the spreadsheet, the Excel spreadsheet that comes off of it. I turn off the settings to collect identity so that it is a truly anonymous submission. And then I post that spreadsheet back as a course announcement. And I highlight some of the key issues that we might want to talk about as a class. For example, my first year at the University of Idaho, my students overwhelmingly told me that they hated the class time starting at 4 p.m. I didn't pick that. I got hired and handed a class schedule. And my students said, Dr. D, can we please meet at least at 3 so that I can get out of here at 6? 7's just too late for me. So I went to my department chair and said, it's midterm. Can I change when my class meets? He said, what about your students? I said, the students are the ones who asked for it. So we got documentation that all of the students in my class wanted to move the class to 3 p.m. The classroom that we were in happened to be available at 3 p.m. So we changed class that semester. And then every semester after that, the class changed. I didn't have to do this big thing. I just had to ask them 3 simple questions and pay attention to what they said. I also get feedback that I can't implement in the moment. And so I promise my students that I will make those changes to the class for the next time. And because I'm working with students who are in a major at the end of their coursework, they talk. Hey, Dr. D said she's going to do this. Oh, really? That's how we're doing it. So now I'm also building credibility. So notice how I'm using empathy and recursive design to thrive and not just survive. So yes, Meg, it absolutely is scaffolding. These are the 3 key thoughts that I want you to take away today. As we navigate this shifting landscape, as we've seen this infusion of money that has thrown more tools at us, use these tools as needed and as directed. Use our models to guide decisions. Play to your strengths, leveraging constraints to manage expectations. Stay up on your professional development, and make sure that you have plans in place that support you as an ID, even if they're not the formal plans of your shop. So these are the resources that I'm sharing with you. These are freebies. You can go grab the Survey of Instructional Design Models completely free. It's a PDF. You can go grab my paper on analyzing the phases of ADDIE. I want to mention that most institutions do have access through the branch SPICE project management paradigm. If you don't have access, reach out to me. I will get you that paper from Rob. He has given me permission to share it. And then importantly, be reading and sharing your work with eLearn Magazine. I am on the editorial board, so this is one that I love to share. And you can grab these slides at that bit.ly below to grab these links and access these resources.
And I feel like there's the end. Thank you so much, Tonia. Really appreciate your time and your expertise. So what we'd like to do now is open it up for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, or you can type it into the chat. And if I'm fast enough, I'll grab it. Any items that we may miss, we will grab those questions and we will put them in the Discord later, so that we can look back at those and maybe provide an answer. So any questions? I'm sorry, who has a question? That's a better way. And it looks like everybody's reaching out for links, which is great. Wow. You have answered all the questions of life, Dr. Dousay. So I have one question. I will prime the pump. So when we look at your book that you've shared with us, right? What would be the best way for somebody to use that book? You know, I have my way of using it, right? But you as the editor and the writer and all, how do you see the best way for maybe even a newer instructional designer using that?
So glad you ended it with even a newer instructional designer. Excuse me. So this is one where my brain immediately went to, well, I have to do a needs analysis. I need to know who my learner is, who's using the book, because my advice is going to change based off of that identity. And give me 1 second, please. So if you are brand new to the field, it can be overwhelming to look at the plethora of models that are out there. In fact, the Survey of ID Models was started by Dr. Kent Gustafson, and he has this fantastic quote that I love. ID models exist in all levels of shape, size, and toxicity. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you're a brand new person, then you want to take a look at more of the taxonomy, not the individual models themselves, but the taxonomy and where we find ourselves using models. Are we using them to design learning for a classroom? Are we using them to design systems for an organization? So that's a good entry point for that entry person. Now for that more intermediate person who is now moving beyond, I have a good grasp of where models can appear and appropriate uses of just a model. Now I want to think about the model. And so that's where you can then flow into which of the types, like, are you looking at classroom learning? Okay, cool. So let's dig a little bit deeper into backwards design or Assure or Pi. Or am I looking for more of a systems approach? So now I'm going to go look at 4CID. Are you, the researcher, really beginning to dig into ID research? Now I want you to skip the front of the book, the middle of the book, and go to the annotated bibliography. And that's one where Rob and I always work with current graduate students who are starting to roll up their sleeves and look at this. And we have them work with us. We acknowledge their contributions. So in the 5th edition, I was that graduate student that was supposed to be the end of my contribution, and I would get a little byline acknowledgement. And then the next thing I knew, I was co-author and doing a lot more to the book. So in the 6th edition that will be coming out from Brill, we will have an acknowledgement for the graduate students who contributed to the new annotated bibliography. But that's how different identities can approach the surveys book, or what we like to call the pencils book. There's always pencils on the cover.
Perfect. Thank you. We do have a question in the chat. You talked about centralized, hybrid, decentralized models. What are your thoughts on external or contracted out models for ID projects?
Such a fantastic question, Teddy. Thank you. Those I would classify under that hybrid approach, and they can feel incredibly constraining because now you don't necessarily feel like you have any control, and you may not even have the full picture. So you're working with blinders. If you find yourself in that outsourced contracted role and it's an independent, it's not a shop that's working with an institution. So this is where I'm thinking of Whitney Kilgore. She's a fantastic person in distance learning and ID, and her group often partners up with institutions. And that's a bit different because there's a bit more cohesion happening. But if you find yourself being that one-off contractor, you definitely want to take those 3 steps, but you want to add some questions to make sure that you're doing an in-depth analysis, not just of their needs, but of your needs to be successful as a designer. What tools do you have access to? What recommendations can you make? Because oftentimes I'm seeing in that one-off, it's not like they hand you a standard operating procedure that you now know what are your constraints. You've got to do a little bit more work to figure out your constraints and lanes in that particular position.
Cool, thank you. And then one more has come to me. When you talked about, we've had a few comments around UDL. How do we bring that into ID? I feel that ID has a handle on UDL, but then how do we bring that to the people that we're working with so that we help them understand that, so that they're coming to us with materials that are somewhat prepared? They've used headers, they've used, things like that. So it's a little bit easier on our end.
This is where I can think about that struggle of identities. So when I come into building a course, I'm bringing that ID lens because that's one of my identities. And I'm bringing that instructor faculty member lens because I'm a tenured faculty member. Faculty want easy. I have to remind my faculty now that I'm an administrator that there's no easy button. It does not exist. But when I start having these conversations around UDL, I ask some of my faculty, how many emails do you get from CDAR, our Center for Disability and Accessibility Resources for Students? So we have a system in place at U of I where the first week of the semester, any of my students who are working with CDAR, I get an email notification that clearly tells me the student's name, their student ID number, what class they're enrolled in, and what accessibility needs they have. Knock on wood, I'm going on a solid 10 years here. I have never had to change anything in my class based off of that notification because I brought my UDL lens to design the class in the first place. So when I have this conversation with my faculty, I'm like, so how many are you getting? They're like, oh my gosh, 5 years ago, I used to never get any. And now I'm getting 3, a dozen a semester, depending on their teaching load. Okay, so how much work are you now needing to put into making your class accessible for this learner? Well, I just don't have time for this. Well, guess what? Let's back that bus up. Let's work on getting your course designed accessibly to begin with. And then you're going to get these requests and go, oh, okay, this is how I handle that. Now it's going to be an easier lift. So trying to help them back into this notion of, if I prepare for it, then it's going to be less work for me later. Now, for some of my faculty, I'm not going to lie, and I use myself as this example because the last 3 years, we're staring at a lot more screens. Once upon a time, my advisor would send me a Word document back and it would be blown up to 180%. And I would be like, oh no, let's back that down to 60%. I'm fine. I'm 45. My eyes are fading. I'm blowing documents up to 140% so that I can see them. So I'm asking my faculty, what are the things that they're doing personally to be more successful, to help them be empathetic and understand what their students are going through.
Nice. I like that part, always taking that time, right? To say, what is it that somebody else might need, right? It's not just like, I like it, it's a thing, but always, intentionally helping somebody identify what is that one step that I could take that makes it that much easier for the next person. Yeah. So thank you so much. Are there any other questions or such from the group? That's me doing the Jeopardy thing in my head. All right. Well, again, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. Tomorrow, we will have Dr. Rob Moore speaking with us. And Dr. Moore is coming out of Florida. So he's going to be hitting us up with some more than meets the eye transformative approaches to distance education. And so you got to stick around. You got to come back for that one. But have a fantastic rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the conference today.